Reginald here. By popular demand, I'm doing DPS next. I hear Sun Tzu said in chapter 4 that the good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. So, here are 5 core concepts for playing DPS that will help you do just that. Positioning, mechanical skill, applying pressure, securing picks, and tactical acumen. Just like the last video, this one is not meant to be exhaustive. I just want to give you some basics and some fun ideas you can explore. It is also meant to be independent of your specific skill level, so it'll be useful for most players. Number 1, positioning. Positioning is one of those words that just gets thrown out there a lot without really explaining anything. Your positioning is terrible. Okay, fine, but by the 5 rusting spires, what does that even mean? What defines good positioning versus bad positioning? Let me try to pull up an example and we'll talk it out together. Here's a map you've certainly played. In this case, you're playing Hela. She's a relatively low mobility hero with a singular escape/mobility ability on a fairly long cooldown. Where do you think you should stand? Psych. You don't have enough information to make that decision, and that's because there's literally no context yet. And that's a key part of positioning. It's all fundamentally relative to your situation. Let's firm this example up and talk about places you could be, and then I'm going to provide some decision-making criteria to help you position better in any situation. Okay, here is a specific circumstance. You are on defense. The enemy payload is here. The enemies are returning after a full reset from a lost team fight, as in you won. Here is their new distribution. Your team is set up like this. Notice that in this image, you cannot see one of the DPS. Insufficient information is a common problem. Where could you potentially stand? I'm just going to circle a bunch of places you could potentially be here that jump out at me. Let's take this one spot as an example here. This is a decent spot for Hela. Good commanding sight line, high up on terrain where only some heroes can easily access her without a long walk around the back. Near enough to her team that she can escape to them pretty easily. What makes this position good or bad? Well, how about I unveil the actual enemy team's comp, and we can just think about whether you like being here anymore. We've got a Thor and a Groot, Storm with 2 healers, and the final hero is invisible, but we know from a previous engagement that it's a Psylocke. How much of your bacon do you want to bet that she's somewhere around here right now? Are you feeling a bit exposed? There's so many places to play, and I cannot possibly tell you the exact right one, and I'm not trying to. Instead, let me give you some questions that you can ask yourself to help you judge for yourself. Line of sight. How many approach angles can you cover without having to cast around too much, like looking around too much? Distance. How close or far am I from the enemy? Exposure. How many lanes of approach or lanes of fire are you potentially exposed to? Many directions or few? Escape. What opportunities do you actually have to escape? Will you be required to use abilities, or can you just disengage by walking around a corner? Cover. Do you actually have a hard piece of cover immediately available you can use to break LOS if you take too much damage, so that shooting characters cannot confirm a pick on you if you get kind of low? Healing. Is there healing nearby within line of sight that you can get, either players or health packs? Support. Is your team able to actually assist you? Predictability. Is your position likely to attract attention, or are you going to generate surprise by being here? Compounded advantage. Does your line of sight align with damage dealing potential from your own teammates? Like, can anybody else shoot what you're shooting? What heroes does the enemy have? What heroes are on the enemy team will dictate your positions quite often, mostly based on their ability to punish your choices through their own movement or fire. I hope these questions start to rattle around in your head as you pick places to be. It's hardly a perfect list, but if you start just asking yourself these questions every time you pick a place or find yourself dying in a place, especially when watching a replay, you will start to refine where you stand and why. Let's just pick 2 places on the map you could stand that are in these specific circumstances a bit better. How about here, and then maybe here? Why don't you take a minute and see if you can work out why I chose these 2 spots. Just pause here for a second and look. These may not be the best possible places, but they are better than being exposed to that Psylocke and all of the fire from the storm and a potential Thor dive all at once. Ideas like these are what is meant by positioning. Number 2, mechanical skill. Let's just address the elephant in the room. When it comes to DPS roles and hero shooters, the simple reality is that knowing is only half the battle. The other half is the mechanical skill required to deliver extraordinary violence. No matter how many cool tricks you know, and no matter how cruelly you stack the odds in your favor, you will eventually need to hit your shots. Application of damage is done via mechanical skill, and DPS tends to demand more of it on average than other classes. It's just the reality that you will eventually end up in a 1v1 at some point. If you do not have the aim, the the combo muscle memory, the naturally lower and practiced reaction times, you're going to lose to the player that does. You can practice, you can get better, you can adjust your sensitivities and crosshairs, you can get your combos down pat and all that. But let's be brutally honest here, some of it's going to come down to talent. So what do you do if you want to play a DPS and are mechanically gated? You just don't have the god aim required to run a head clicker DPS like Hela. Well, fortunately, this is a hero shooter. You can learn to play a combo-based DPS instead. And there are luckily many good options in these categories, and even the ones widely considered bad in the meta still have their world's best players with insane win rates. You may not be a talented head clicker, but maybe you are a legendary street fighter. I don't know. You're gonna have to figure that out. Go watch replays of the top 500 players and see what you think you can learn and emulate. It's not always that your team is bad. Sometimes it is literally just you. Get good or get out. I'm speaking from experience.
They hit a checkpoint. Now might be a good time to stop them.
Number 3, applying pressure. Applying pressure is a critical aspect of playing DPS. It's not just about getting eliminations or top damage numbers. It's about making the enemy team feel like they can't breathe. This is where you force errors, drain resources, and disrupt their plans. Pressure doesn't necessarily mean you're getting kills, it means you're forcing reactions. Let me try to give you a simple example. Maybe you're playing Punisher and you've posted up on a side angle, just a little bit off. The enemy heals are doing their jobs really well and you just can't quite secure a kill without exposing yourself to too much risk. However, if you force the healers to burn cooldowns and resources, and tanks to reposition or use shields on you, then you have created pressure at least. This pressure creates opportunities for your team to push or secure an advantage in a big team fight. The thing about pressure is that it's almost a physical phenomena. Let's say everyone pushes in a line fight like this. If the enemy is feeling a bit too much pressure, too much incoming damage and player presence, they will literally, typically, just back up. But that might not work since there's no cover where they're being forced to back up to. So instead, some of the players might squish out onto side angles to try and use cover, but if you happen to be playing on one of those sides, or maybe one of your flankers is playing on one of those sides, suddenly they're in much worse straits. This is pressure. You can combine with other players' generated pressure, like tanks or other DPS, to create an unwinnable positional and situational disadvantage for the enemy. Another form of pressure is how you force out ability usage on enemies. Too much damage on Namor and he's going to use his water bubble thing. That's a cooldown. Now you have a window to try and secure a kill, or maybe he'll be forced to play more passive for a while. This is all part of that ebb and flow in games. Number 4, securing picks. Securing picks is what DPS is for. Though I want you to notice I didn't say getting picks, I said securing. And this isn't for no reason. Winning the 1v1 or sniping a healer solo feels great, and sometimes you will need to sync those to make plays and win games. But oftentimes, the reality when firing into all this healing is that you're just kind of pumping damage on targets you see as opportune in that moment, farming for ult charge, hoping the enemy's healers don't notice what you're up to and can get a lucky pick. Things really kick off for a DPS when your team has already worked down but can't quite kill a key target. That's when you swoop in and drive it over the finish line. That's securing the pick. Sure, you can get kills all by yourself, and that is part of your job, especially as a flank DPS, but taking an enemy from 250 health to 0 is a lot harder than taking an enemy from 50 health to 0. Keep your eyes open and apply your damage where it's going to be most effective. Number 5, tactical acumen. I have a few key tactical concepts that I want to add to your toolkit, and I hope they help you. This is hardly an exhaustive list. We could literally talk about tactics for like the rest of our lives, but let's just do a couple of easy ones. First up for me is a key concept that's going to help any ranged hero, Enfilading Fire. I explained this in a Helldivers 2 video once upon a time, but let me do it again. Basically, it's about the orientation of you versus a construction of the enemy formation. It's a technique used to maximize your chances of effective hits into an enemy while minimizing your own risk of exposure to return fire. All you need to do is align yourself so you're firing on the short side into their formation, so that should you penetrate or miss an enemy target in front of you, you can end up hitting the one behind or behind that, and so on. It's a really easy technique, and it absolutely comes up in real games. I mean, look at this top-down footage. Let me just draw some lines on it so you can see what I'm talking about. I don't have to be especially good at aiming here to deal valuable damage. It's pretty hard to miss hitting something in this case. Don't try to pretend this doesn't happen all the time in messy team fights, and that's exactly when you can exploit this concept for easy damage value, or heal value. if you're Invisible Woman. And most of you have probably intuited this already, but if you didn't know about it, it's harder to actually use it intentionally. Next, I want to talk about flanking. Sun Tzu says, attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected. When most people talk about flanking, they are talking about Psylocke or Black Panther harassing healers in the backline. But do you remember our example from before? Let me pull it up. There is another place you could stand, even as Hela. The thing is, it's pretty surprising to start taking back shots from an enemy Hela partway into your push onto cart. It's riskier for the Hela, of course, to be here, but you do have your singular escape ability. If you stand right here and strike at the right moment, you might be able to pick off a wounded Storm before anyone knows where you're firing from. You might even pick up a healer before you jet off to safety. Knowing when you can and should or should not do something like this with a lower mobility hero is part of tactical acumen. Tactical acumen. The only way you will learn is to try it and die many times, preferably in quick play first, and then in competitive modes. Experience will make the difference here. That magic sauce of intuition only comes into play after many, many trials. Knowing when to take the aggressive posture and when to take the passive one is a big part of getting good. Usually the reason flanking works, by the way, is the element of surprise. I'd love to cover more tactics, but this is really just meant to be a primer, so I'm going to give you one bright thought on the way out. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu says, military tactics are like unto water, for water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. So in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Without being too self-indulgent about it, what this means for you as a player in a hero shooter is that you should try to figure out where the weak spots are in the enemy team and seek to repeatedly punish them all game long. Ideally, you and your team will coordinate this, but it's a dead easy concept and tactic. Maybe one of their tanks is just diving super hard and often out of healer line of sight. Punish him. Turn him into a feed tank. Maybe one of their DPS is just incompetent. Kill them over and over. Most likely though, the healers are always the easiest meat. If nothing else, the healers are always a priority target anyway. Whatever it is, be thinking about what behaviors you're seeing on the enemy team and figure out how to exploit what mistakes the enemy team makes repeatedly. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this little DPS guide. On my way out, I just want to show you the flanking kill that helped me hit Diamond as Hela. Next up will be my support guide.
Battle is over.
I would like to take a moment to express my genuine and significant gratitude to Bonehead for becoming my first Oath Taker level member. Your support really does mean a lot to me and has made it so much easier for me to continue to justify the amount of effort I pour into this channel. I would like to provide a special thank you to members Tosh and Miles Williams Lewis. Your atypical support really means a lot to me and I appreciate it. I'd also like to extend a thank you to the rest of my members. Support helps the channel a lot. If you would like to become a member of this channel, there is a link in the description below and a join button next to the subscribe button. Thank you all so much for visiting. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.